Our next speaker against the motion is Alain de Botton. He is a philosopher, an essayist. He's written numerous books, really about the philosophy of everyday life, how Proust can change your life. His most latest book is The Architecture of Happiness, which discusses questions of beauty and ugliness in architecture. Alain.
There was clearly a lot of wonderful architecture in the past. Here's the Villa Rotonda, here's the Rue de Castiglione, and there's a lot of appalling architecture in the modern day. This is a convention center in Malaysia. This is the view from my window. I don't live in it, but I live, it's true, I do live in a traditional house, but this is the view from it, and it's appalling. This is where I stayed a couple of weeks ago. This is the Travel Lodge near Colchester, not a place to be recommended. I remember lying on that bed and dreaming of this place, cathedral in Reims, and thinking how lovely it would be if only the Travelodge had taken that over. This has led a lot of very well-meaning and otherwise intelligent people to suppose that we must clearly build a little bit in this sort of spirit. We must go back in time because clearly the masters of the past knew how to build. This idea has been very influential, as I say, among some people. It captured the mind of a completely insane Japanese property developer who a few years ago traveled the medieval Netherlands, or rather looked at the architecture of the medieval Netherlands and thought, well, it's so beautiful, why don't I take a little bit of this and bring it back home to Japan? So this is the suburbs of Nagasaki, and it's also a reproduction of some of the choicest parts of, as I say, the medieval Netherlands. This is not Amsterdam, it's, as I say, Nagasaki. There's something clearly very wrong here. It's got nothing to do with the individual building, clearly very well finished, very well detailed, bricks imported from the Netherlands, etc. It's got to do with the fact that these buildings have forgotten where they are. It seems very important that a building remembers two things. A, where it is, B, what the time is. Let me look at the where it is bit. I'm a great fan of light switches. Whenever I go to a hotel and arrive in a foreign country, I love to look at the light switches, and I love to take photographs of them. Very strange person I am. If you look at the image on this image here, you'll notice that, you might notice that this is a Swiss light switch, and when you hit that, you know you're in Switzerland. Somehow that light switch has captured some of the key qualities of the Swiss way of life. This light switch is, of course, a North American light switch. Again, when you hit that, you know you're in the States. There's nothing more depressing when you travel abroad than when you go to a place like this. It could be anywhere. It could be in Denver, it could be in Georgia, in Atlanta. It's in fact downtown Tokyo, but you don't know where it is. In other words, we want an architecture that somehow alludes to its place through its use of materials and through the language of its design. Not only do we need an architecture that remembers the place, we also need to find an architecture that remembers what the time is. This is a building that's really forgotten what the time is. This is a building that was built in 1992, or was it 1750? We don't know. It's in Poundbury, and it houses a group of IT workers who work down the road. There's clearly something going on here that makes us uncomfortable. It reminds us in a way of Nagasaki, as does this, a building by Quinlan Terry in Regent's Park. However finely detailed it may be and well made, it's somehow speaking to us of the wrong things. Architecture and works of design speak. They speak of politics, our way of life, a way of ordering society. Take a couple of tea sets. If you had to put politics to this is left wing, this is right wing, this rides a bicycle, this drives a top-end Mercedes. I'm joking, but what we can see is in the simplest works of design, there is a spirit. And I think when we're choosing buildings or just tea sets, we often want a kind of work of design that reflects our own ideals. Take some taps. All of them have a character. You could turn all of them into people, and they would have a distinct character. If you had to go on holiday with any one of them, I'd choose probably this one. But we all very clearly recognize that there is a spirit to works of design. Now, what's wrong with modern with the idea that we can go backwards in time and build things of an old spirit today? Well, this is some of the problem. This is the Schlossbrücke, designed by Schinkel, classical architect in Berlin. Goes up in 1824. This is his Altes Museum. again in Berlin. Now, when Schinkel built this, he wanted us to think about the values of ancient Greece and Rome. That's why he built like this. I think the values of ancient Greece and Rome are in many ways admirable, but they are also in certain key ways anachronistic. In other words, if we build buildings that speak to us of the values of ancient Greece and Rome, we will have an awkward shift of gear when we walk out of these buildings into a world of modern IT systems and office life, and also family life, which has changed incomparably since these buildings were originally designed. We need buildings to capture the modern spirit. What does that mean? This is a modern building. This is a set of modern buildings. This is the Finnish pavilion at the Seville Expo in 1992. It summons up an image of Finland, which is both recognizably modern and rooted in tradition. This is Brasilia, Oscar Niemeyer's capital in Brazil. Most of Brazil looks nothing like this. However, this is a picture, an image that Brazilians wanted to build for themselves, promising themselves what their future might look like. We seem to be in danger of going backwards and somehow idealizing a past which simply doesn't fit the reality of the present. We're in danger of doing a Marie Antoinette. This was Marie Antoinette's toy village at the bottom of the Garden of Versailles, where she went to recapture the spirit of the olden days and of the peasant rural life. The only people who live like this are not peasants. We are obsessed by a peasant architecture because we're frightened of the modern world. We haven't found a way of making ourselves at home in the modern world, and so we run away to this. There is a timidity. By the way, a lot of Barrett housing looks a little bit like this. There is a timidity to this kind of architecture. I'm saying that we should try and make ourselves at home in modernity. There are examples of Japanese buildings, for example. I showed you some Japanese buildings that didn't fit their time or place. These are some Japanese buildings that I think, as a modern, a very wealthy Japanese, Simon Jenkins was saying that no wealthy modern people want to live in modern architecture. Well, they do. This is a top stockbroker in Tokyo. Where does he live? He lives in a building that is both modern and attuned to the past. This is a man who's made a fortune in IT in Tokyo. Where does he, just outside Tokyo, where does he live? In a modern building that remembers the past. Here are some other examples of buildings that are modern but remember the past. This is the Yale Center for British Art done by Louis Kahn. This is a villa for an extremely rich American who decided to live here. Very attractive kind of architecture. Herzog and de Meuron building for another very wealthy couple who have chosen, not by a diktat of the state, but by their own free choice, to live here. Of course, there is such a thing as pastiche when you're doing modern buildings. This is Georgian architecture. This is bad, fake Georgian architecture. What we want is not to imitate the past slavishly, but to take inspiration from it. This is Michael Hopkins's Queen's building in Cambridge. This is a building that is both recognizably modern and attuned to the past. That's what I'm arguing for, an architecture that doesn't hide, that doesn't feel that we shouldn't develop land, that takes inspiration from the way that the architects of Venice turned this into this. And they did so not by being afraid of modernity. This was an extremely modern building in its day. And what I'm arguing against the motion for is the idea that we should not be frightened of drawing from the past, but making something distinctive and attuned to the spirit and the needs of the present. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker for the motion is Leon Krier, who is an architect and urban planner, and he's been one of the most influential neo-traditional architects and planners. He's best known, of course, for his development of Poundbury with Prince Charles, which I think Stephen Bailey referred to as doggerel and pastiche, sham, fake, and bogus. But Leon has written lots of books. He's joined the office of James Sterling in the 68 to 74, and his latest book is Architecture, Choice or Fate. Leon.
Thank you, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm always stunned by the shallowness of the critiques which are addressed to the Prince of Wales. When you see the film of Michael Frayn, he appears to be an idiot. In any documentation I have seen on him, he appears to be a very shallow person, and also in the speakers who are against the motion, he appears to be a nitwit. I am not a royalist, I never was, and but I remember very I think most of you here remember incredibly the moment when he made that speech at the RIBA conference at Hampton Court. He was invited by the RIBA, and I'm thankful that the RIBA should come back to the subject, because what the Prince of Wales did was actually give voice to something, a terrible feeling of, an ill feeling of uncomfort and despair about architecture, which nobody dared to express. Indeed, many people don't even dare to express it now. Mitterrand had become the great defender of neo-modernism, and the Prince of Wales became the defender of traditional architecture. Now we live in democracy, and it should be considered that these positions, which are very different, that they belong to the same time, and you don't have to say that you reach back to the past and that you have a simplistic mind if you speak English. We all speak English here, and that is, we could say we just reach back to the past. How can we use a language which has been spoken in the past? Now, traditional architecture, and I have been knowing the Prince now for 22 years. I've worked for him for 20 years. He was my 4th client in England, and all my colleagues said, you must refuse this job by Charlie, expletive. I said to the first employer, James Sterling, but he is my only client in this damn country. Why should I refuse him? In 20 years' experience, I have never seen anything approaching of his image in public. It appears to be simplistic. Now, to do in a situation where we are a culture of synthetics, an industrial culture entirely based, our specificity is entirely signified and characterized by our excessive use of fossil fuels. Without the use of fossil fuels, there is no modernism. There is only modernity. Now, the mistake of modernism is to take itself for the only legitimate representative of modernity, and all the rest, they just belong to the past. They are ridiculous. Now, all the people who live in traditional houses are then idiots and ridiculous. They look back into the past. It's, of course, this doesn't stand to scrutiny. And yet these incredibly childish arguments, they dominate education, they dominate the media, they dominate indeed the architectural scene. Most of the teaching in this country, you can actually not learn traditional architecture in this country in any school. Traditional architecture, in its definition, is a technology of building with natural materials and fitting natural materials in such a way that they stand up. It's not a style of the past, it's a technology. Now, to historicize a technology using natural materials is, of course, rejecting an entire branch of man-made environment as being a matter of the past, and you cut yourself from the roots. It's like saying, if you speak English, you are not a modern person. It's of the same nature. Now, all the Prince did is to open a possibility for traditional architecture to be practiced again. Now, in a situation where industry produces a synthetic culture with synthetic methods and synthetic materials, it is extremely difficult to work with architects who have not been trained to design traditional buildings. To do a traditional town is almost impossible. It's much more difficult than to design a decent modernist building. So the condition to produce this is not an easy one, and the Prince of Wales has not taken an easy step into doing this. His own organization was against it. They complotted for 4 years before this became possible in order not to do it. And he stuck through it. I had many clients before the Prince of Wales, and whenever there was the slightest difficulties with the media, they would immediately give up, because of course, who wants bad publicity? And the Prince of Wales stuck it through. He's truly, I'm not a royalist, I say it again, but he's a heroic character who, through his action, is giving royalty in this country a legitimacy it didn't have. And it has a tragic side to it. And it's to be taken extremely seriously. I can also promise you that he has stuck through it, and the next phase of Poundbury will be authentically built. It will not just be decently built with natural materials, but it will be structurally also coherent. Now, anyone who goes to that place and pretends that it's Disneyland doesn't know Disneyland. You know, Disneyland if you go to Disneyland and Disney World, also has always a side of modernism. You may have forgotten this. You know, Epcot and so on was a vision of the future. Yet it's only the historicist or the kind of traditionalist imitations which are accused of being of the Disney world. Yeah. So I think that traditional architecture is going to come back extremely soon. It's already upon us. With the increase in fossil fuel costs and so on, we have to go back to natural materials. We have to go back to pedestrian cities vertically and horizontally. And this is going to be the condition of the future, and architects have to learn again to fit natural materials in ways which are pleasant. And I think the Prince of Wales has been showing the way. To simplify the thing, traditional architecture is not a style. It's as many styles as there are landscapes, as there are climatic conditions, and it is an extremely rich polyglot language. Modernism instead is a single man's language. It's a newspeak which purely can only exist with synthetic materials, and it will die with the increasing cost of synthetic materials. Thank you.
Thank you. Our final speaker against the motion is Sean Griffiths, who is founding director of the architectural practice FAT, Fashion Architecture Taste. It's very provocative architecture that he believes in. It explores issues of taste and communication. He's also visiting professor, Louis Kahn, visiting professor of architecture at the Yale School of Architecture. Sean Griffiths.
Oh my God, what is there left to say on this subject? I think it was May the 17th, 1984, that the Prince of Wales mounted this famous attack on the architectural profession and on modern architecture in particular. 4 months after that, I enrolled on an architecture course. I've got some grey hairs, you might notice. At the not particularly glamorous Manchester Polytechnic. Not surprisingly, the drafting rooms of that illustrious institution were full of the talk of the Prince's speech. And as we donned our smoking jackets and retired to the comfort of the leather armchairs of Nelson Mandela House, as the Students' Union was then known, we lit our cigars and pondered the question, is the Prince right about modern architecture? Of course, we did not smoke cigars in the leather armchairs of Manchester Polytechnic. It was run by the Revolutionary Communist Party at the time. Nor did we give much thought to the Prince's views on modern architecture. In fact, I think it's fair to say, and excuse my modernist uncouthness, but I think it's fair to say we didn't give a shit about the Prince of Wales' views on architecture. There were actually far more important things going on. So my question tonight is not, was the Prince right about modern architecture? Is why the hell are we still talking about this 24 years later? It's not as even in 1984 that the Prince was at the leading edge of the debate. Modernism was not the reigning orthodoxy in 1984. Postmodernism and neoclassicism reigned. By 1984, postmodernism was itself under attack from a new generation. I think this... No, it doesn't work. Aha! It does work eventually. Here we go. This is a work by Zaha Hadid, recent recipient of the Pritzker Prize. First woman to ever receive the Pritzker Prize, interestingly. You'll notice there's only one woman on the top table tonight. This was done in 1982 as a reaction against postmodernism. So what the Prince was exhibiting in 1984 was really how utterly out of fashion he was, and I think probably not for the first time. And you may laugh and say, well, fashion, what has that got to do with it? And fashion is very much a dirty word in architecture. It has nothing to do with architecture. And if there's one thing that unites architects, modern and traditional, it is a view that architecture and fashion have nothing to do with each other. But architecture is responsive to fashion and does change as fashions change. So architectural styles go in and out of fashion. So to exclude one particular architectural style as not the spirit of the age or not appropriate seems to me completely ridiculous in an age of pluralism. Here's an example. Trellick Tower. You see it on the West Way. You see it as you come in from Paddington Station. Exactly the type of thing that the Prince of Wales was attacking. And certainly at the time, it was very, very unpopular. But now, it's hugely popular. In fact, if you tried to buy an apartment in one of these towers now, you probably wouldn't be able to afford it, or at least I wouldn't, because I'm just a mere architect. Similarly, this building, the Barbican. Oh, sorry, no, that's another Trellick Tower. The Barbican complex. Now, this is a prime example of modern architecture, not designed by a very famous architect, designed by a very competent firm of commercial architects called Chamberlain Bond Powell. And this isn't at all a kind of a sort of canonical example, and exhibits all of the qualities of modernism. It has a certain kind of planning which is not based on the street. It has a form of construction which is certainly not traditional. And I found myself actually agreeing with Leon quite a lot as one of the two architects, is that craft is really important. And this is a fantastically crafted building. I walk through it a lot, and the quality of the concrete work is quite astounding. And these buildings are the sort that I think Simon Jenkins was attacking recently in a Guardian article he wrote, calling for the demolition of Robin Hood Gardens, which is a building by the Smithsons in the East End of London. He described Trellick Tower as intrusive, and I'm sure he feels in a similar way about this kind of thing. And he described New Brutalism somewhat sneeringly as something that its creators were proud of, this brutality. The point I'm trying to make is that Simon and his colleagues over there mightn't like this stuff, but there are actually lots of people who do. Similarly, these buildings, if you want to buy a 2-bedroom flat in this complex, you won't get much change out of £1 million. That's how popular it is. Okay, and so what I'm trying to say is that fashions change. Something that was unpopular at one time becomes popular later, and so you shouldn't dismiss it. The point I really wanted to make, I think, which goes back to what I was saying at the beginning, was that this argument about styles is actually irrelevant. We should be talking about quality. And I said that we weren't really interested in debating the argument about the prince in architecture school in 1984, because at that time we were busy organising protests against the government of the time, which, as you will remember, was run by Margaret Thatcher. And what was going on at that time, and we're still experiencing the results of that, was a promotion of the free market, where all values to do with the public good, with the idea of architecture or any other profession being some kind of noble calling for the public good, was being thrown out in favour of a series of values that were to do with business. And we're living with the consequences of that today, the New Labour project, of course, being a continuation of Thatcherism. And this, not any kind of debate about style, is the issue we should be talking about. Because we have these hideous procurement systems called design and build, called PFI, which are delivering the most revolting, cheaply made, poor space standards in which our kids are going to be educated, in which if you're ill, you're going to be incarcerated, and if you're really unlucky, you get to live in a product of these systems. And these are the things we should be talking about, not some kind of stupid debate about one style or another. So what I'm calling for tonight is that this is the swan song of this debate, and can we please talk about something a little bit more important? Thank you.